Okay, and we're at 10 o'clock now, and I see the participants that we have online have filled out the poll. I'm gonna leave this county poll up for just another minute, and I'm gonna go ahead and introduce myself and talk to you about what's been going on. So my name's Keri Handaly, and I work for the City of Gresham. I have a background in environmental science and policy, and I work primarily as a toxic reduction educator when I do education for the city. And that is because I have a passion for protecting people, pets, families, and wildlife from toxic chemicals, which are all around us every day. And today, as part of the Gresham Earth Day series, we are bringing you a virtual Earth Week this year for the 50th anniversary, and we're super excited that we were able to punt during this public health crisis that's been happening in our country. And so we are still able to carry on and do some fun things and hopefully bring some joy to some people. So today I'm going to talk about a little bit about birds, bugs, and mason bees, and then also provide you some other resources and fun at the end of this presentation. Emily, if you wouldn't mind putting up the next poll, I'm going to ask you to give me some feedback on what type of elements you have in your yard currently, so we can see what kind of things we want to highlight in this presentation.
And I also wanted to just introduce myself real quick. So I'm Emily Lane, and I'm the AmeriCorps with Recycling and Solid Waste at City of Gresham, and I'll just kind of be in the background, facilitating. One quick thing, so we're not using the Q&A function. If you do have any questions or comments, please put those down in the chat at the bottom there, and we'll be monitoring that if there's any questions or clarification needs.
Yeah, and I should say, if you haven't been on the Zoom before, just scroll around the edges. It's usually at the bottom. You should see a little Q&A box that will allow you to type. If you're using a phone, it might not be as easy to type. We can unmute you at the end, and we'll have a brief conversation, and we can go back to any slides you want. If that helps aid the conversation. So we have,
and so the question looks like the question's not, sorry, it's not set up as multiple choice, but yeah, I guess if there are multiple, we can put them in the chat or something, but yeah, we assume there's a little bit of each.
Yeah, and if Emily reads out a question that comes in real time during a slide, I can address it. So that's how we'll do this today. Okay, so what I'm seeing on the poll,
and I can share those, so.
We've got some folks with some water in their yard and not having anyone report much mulching or bare soil. We've got shrubs, perennial flowering plants, and ground cover. I bet there's some trees in some people's yards. I don't know, no one selected trees, but maybe maybe we've got an anomaly of people with lots with no trees, which is okay, but trees are obviously beneficial for many reasons. They help capture stormwater as it falls down to the ground, and their canopy is important for helping offset the flow of water which runs onto our impervious streets and then goes back out to our rivers and streams. So trees also help clean our air, so we love trees. And if you can find a place in your yard to plant a tree, you can look for columnar shaped trees and evergreen trees that cause less litter, and trees that are not as tall. So there's all kinds of help that you can get from OSU Master Gardeners or your local nursery. if you're looking for what type of tree might suit your situation. Okay, well, I think we will move on from this poll. So there's the share results, right? And we will start the presentation now. I'm gonna forward to the next slide. So today's talk is going to focus on elements to add into your yard for bees, birds, and bugs. We're going to touch on the top things to avoid at your home and yard if you're trying to support wildlife. And we're going to talk about how it's connected to our local rivers and streams. And then lastly, cover resources and other fun things. So the first thing we start off with is, what do people, pets, and animals need? Well, your yard is probably set up to your needs. So you probably have some type of patio, some chairs, some play or relaxation areas, and shade cover, whether that's in the form of a tree or a patio. Pets also like shade in the hot summer. They like to go out and lay under the shrubs, and they like play and rest areas. And we might also need to provide a portion of our yard that maybe is less landscaped so that our dogs can tread on it and maybe dig a little bit and do their natural dog habits and not tear up the rest of our yard. And then lastly, we are going to focus on this next part today. Animals need water, a food source, and habitat and plant materials. So what are the elements of a yard that is most supportive of wildlife? We would have, ideally, a tall tree, a medium-sized tree, a large shrub, a medium shrub, and some ground layers, and some perennial flowering plants. And a lot of our plants have fruits and seeds and berries. Those are all good to ensure you take a look at your plant inventory and see what looks good. Make sure you have flowers that bloom early in the season, middle of the season, and late in the season. And some of the best ones for late season are sunflowers and asters. So this is just, this is the best way that we mimic our natural forests in our green spaces and wild places in Oregon as much as we can in our urban environment. And this graphic also shows you the height at which various types of birds live. So the taller, larger birds tend to live up in the top of the canopies, such as crows and hawks. And then owls and woodpeckers and chickadees and nuthatches live in the middle section of the canopy. And then lower down in our shrubs, we really see, that's where we'll see hummingbirds, juncos, towhees, wrens, thrushes, and the song sparrows, towhees, wrens, and thrushes also really like to get down on the ground and rummage around in your yard. Also nice to have potentially a veggie garden if you are into gardening. Sometimes we don't think of a veggie garden as habitat, but it's good to let some of your lettuce or herbs and other things go to flower, just a couple of them, if not all of them. If you've harvested them, just leave a couple, let them go to flower, because those flowers attract insects, and those insects attract birds that like to land on our veggies and eat the insects off of our plants. So it's a balanced ecosystem in that way. So then we have an example of some DIY water sources. You can really do this pretty simply by just going around your yard or neighborhood and maybe collecting rocks in various places, or perhaps you already have a collection of nice rocks. They don't have to be beautiful. Get some sand or dirt, some leaves, and potentially pile it up on the side, and you see that to the right of the screen there is just a terracotta clay pot liner that is a shallow water source, and this is a drinking vessel for insects, bees, and other butterflies that need a little bit of balance. They don't like deep waterers that they might fall into and drown. I mean, they'll go to them, but they're likely to fall in and drown. So, and then we see our super cute hummingbirds that live here. Anna's hummingbird lives here year round. A lot of people like to have hummingbird feeders, and if you do, that's a good way to make sure they're coming into your yard. They also love tubular shaped plants like the red flowering currant, which is native, or various types of salvias, which are plentiful, drought tolerant. They also have tubular shaped flowers. They're fun and pretty, and hummingbirds also like them. So hummingbirds like bubbling water. And one thing I wanted to say is you can buy an inexpensive solar water fountain or bubbler, and you can put it in a deep bird bath or a shallow one, and it just works from the sun, and it will help attract and feed bees and other insects and birds. So that's a super fun, easy, inexpensive thing to do. And you can watch the hummingbird video that's featured in the still to the left if you'd like. It's kind of fun to watch them come up and dance in the water. And then this is a water bucket that I have in the very back of my yard. So one of the things that we think about that's kind of traditional is a super neat and tidy yard. But if you can, try to leave a corner of your yard under the shrubs, at least with some broken sticks and some leaves. And perhaps if you prune some of your plants and branches, just pile them under there and let them be, because they are habitat for insects and beetles in particular that are super good predators, and they are all part of a really healthy soil ecology. So you want that those animals to have some habitat in your yard. And you can see that I just have some rocks and leaves. And again, this is under my native serviceberry, which likes shade and is in the back corner of my yard. And I have ferns, and I have some cut down wood from other things in my yard that I've had to prune. Then we talk about what other thing could you add to your yard. If you're crafty, you can find birdhouse blueprints online very easily. The most common urban birds that like to live in birdhouses in our yards are the black-capped chickadee and the Pacific wren. There's several different types of wren, but the Pacific wren is the one that we have in the Northwest that does not exist all over the US, which is kind of a fun thing. Important thing to know is when you're buying a birdhouse or creating one, you want to make sure that you have the hole at 1 1/8 inch and not any larger, or you're going to be able to enable starlings above 1.5 inches. And starlings are a super prolific bird that originally was brought over by European settlers. And as you're probably aware, if you have any food sources, starlings can take over a yard and crowd out native songbirds. So they are considered somewhat of a pest. So we try to, and they also like to steal birdhouses from other birds. They can be lazy in that way. That is their tactic, which, so we do that by excluding them by putting in 1 1/8 inch holes. And so then we want to talk about a lot in this presentation is linked to insect support. And it's natural for us to think about bugs and go, yuck, yuck, yuck. They're icky, they're creepy, they're crawly. And I'm probably not going to change your mind, but maybe if you're on this, viewing this video, you might have a little bit of love for bugs. We're going to learn to love and hug bugs. Haha. So to the very right is a house centipede, which was crawling around not too long ago on my kitchen floor, and I just gently put it in a yogurt tub and set it free outside. They are really great predators, and they're not really a threat to humans. So they can look terrifying, of course, because they have all those long legs. But when you see certain types of bugs, you realize that you have a natural insect control, and that negates the need for so much of chemicals and other techniques, which can be harmful to humans, our children, and our pets. And then The middle picture I took when I visited the OMSI Exquisite Creatures exhibit, which are a bunch of different beetle pupae. And so when you see a shiny beetle in your yard, that is a really good sign because they're a great predator. They eat all kinds of bugs that we find annoying and don't like, and it's also a sign of good soil ecology. And then, of course, the beloved ladybug, and I'm showing the ladybug on a yarrow flower. I really think yarrow is an underutilized garden flower. Ladybugs absolutely love them, and if you want to attract them to your yard, a good way to get them is to put in yarrow. And then I want to call attention to the link I have in this slide. It is free workshops that are put on by East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation Video. They have this PDF on their website, and it is an entire hour of beneficial insect information from an educator who is an insect expert. And it's fascinating and wonderful if you have time to look at that. So today we're going to talk about the blue orchard mason bee a little bit. So why mason bees and how to house them? So this is a beautiful photo that I borrowed from Benton Soil and Water Conservation District. That is the mason bee, and you can see how they have little dots of pollen all over their body. So one of the things that distinguishes a mason bee from a honeybee in terms of a pollinator, actually I'm getting ahead of myself, that's next slide. We'll talk about the fact that the mason bee actually looks a ton like a regular housefly, but how do we tell the difference? So it's actually really hard, but the technical definition of the difference between a bee and a fly is bees always have 4 wings and flies only have 2 wings. That said, I've spent a lot of time in my garden looking at bees, and it's almost impossible to see that they have 4 wings because they're always moving around and they're so translucent you can't see the second set. And another way is that bee wings lay flat on their backs, but they don't always have them flat back, and so they can also position them temporarily in the same shape as a fly, which you can see is a more upright hold of their wings. So even when we think we have a way, it can still be confusing. Bees are also hairier than flies, but when you're really comparing a mason bee to a fly, as we know, flies have giant eyes and they're bigger and they're rounder on the front of their head. As I said, they'll look less hairy if you were really looking closely at the fly. And then flies also have antennae, but they're really short. So if you see antennae on an animal that you think is a bee, it's probably a bee. Although there are some flies that really mimic bees. The housefly is not one of them, but there are bee mimics flies, and I don't have slides of those, and we're not going to go into that today. But the point is, the blue housefly can look a lot like a mason bee. People might think that they need to get rid of them or they have some kind of weird fly swarm, but actually it's just a gentle mason bee. The other thing is houseflies are slightly larger as adults than the mason bee, and they're actually quite small and gentle. So it's a great thing to add to your landscape, especially if you have vegetable gardens and fruiting plants in your yard. They're really great pollinators, which takes me to the next segue about the difference between why we would like to have mason bees versus honeybees. Well, first, if we were to keep honeybees, there are ordinances and regulations around who can have honeybees in various cities and counties. So it's more difficult. Honeybees, as we know, have hives and queens. They can be aggressive. You have to have special suiting to manage them and harvest the honey. So it's a lot more complicated to have a honeybee at your house. Mason bees, not complicated at all for the most part. You can provide their housing, and the interesting thing is, so you see in these photos, this mason bee to the left is absolutely covered in pollen. And there's a special thing about the way that they pollinate flowers. They kind of just lop around, like they look kind of like they're flopping as they walk through the flower, and they just get covered in pollen. As opposed to honeybees, who store carefully their pollen sacs on the sides of their leg. Their bodies are not typically covered in honey, or not honey, pollen. And not only that, but they tend to just go up to the flower very carefully, and they harvest the honey. Again, I keep saying honey. They harvest the pollen and put it back on their legs. And so they're like a little laborer, and so they don't flop around and they don't cross-pollinate as well as mason bees. And the ratio you see down in my slide, the 1 to 71, so according to the OSU Master Gardeners, scientists have studied fruit tree pollination, and they've compared the amount of mason bees to the amount of honeybees that it takes to pollinate one fruit tree. So if you are a Hood River fruit tree grower, you really love mason bees, because it only takes one mason bee to pollinate for every 71 honeybees to do an entire tree. So that's the ratio, actually. So it's 7 mason bees can pollinate an entire fruit tree to just under 500 honeybees. And the other thing is, mason bees come out in the morning, they come out in the evening, and honeybees tend to be very specific to the middle of the day. So mason bees are, they come out in early spring when honeybees are not yet available, and they work longer hours. So if that's how we want to divide it up, they also don't sting us. So there's all kinds of benefits. So types of housing. So this photo was loaned to me by Susan Spencer, who is a Gresham resident who has been facilitating wild mason bees at her home. And there's all kinds of ways you can provide tubes for mason bees. So I've put here some specifics for you to try to remember. We have traditionally had 4-inch long drilled blocks. Back in the last few years, a lot of blocks were around, the 4x4 wood blocks that you could buy at the store. However, scientists have continued to study mason bees and found that they actually prefer and do better in reproduction if they have at least a 6-inch long tube. And they also like a specific size hole. So if you were going to drill your own holes, you would want to use a 3/8 inch drill, and then you would insert a 6mm paper straw, which is a standard size of paper straw. You could buy them at a regular store. Just make sure that you're buying a long version, or you can order them online from specialty bee and backyard bee type shops that have paper straws that are manufactured specifically for mason bee homes. They can be a tiny bit more expensive than just the ones you would buy for your house for your own personal use. But they basically, you can do either or. But the important thing to remember is don't use plastic straw, because plastic straws don't breathe, and these are living organisms. The other thing to remember is we want to have a little bit of an overhang on our housing if we can, or put it under our own home awning or on the side of a patio, so that the ends of the tubes are not getting rained on, ideally. So let's just go over the materials again. So in the top of this photo are some wild reeds, which I harvested a few weeks ago when I was out on walks in green spaces. You can do it on walks through your neighborhood, just in the public right-of-ways and medians, and if not, well, depends on if you have a median that you can, like a park median, that you can go in your area. But you can find a lot of hollow twigs if you bend off the dried up stalks on flowers, blackberry canes, teasel, which is a noxious weed, but has great hollow dried out stalks. And you can, so if you get a long stalk, they have joints and you can snap them just after the joint, and then the back of the tube will be solid, which the bees need. So you can use absolutely 100% free natural materials to harvest. Just make sure that you're putting a collection of approximately 6 millimeter holes together. You can also collect reeds with smaller holes that will provide habitat for the leafcutter bee. Just ideally put the same size holes together and don't mix them up. The other thing, as we talked about, you can also find specialized cardboard tubes. You could try to make your own thin paper cardboard rolled tubes into that 6 millimeter straw shape. It's thought that cardboard tubes are less ideal unless they're really protected in your bee house, because they can absorb moisture, and obviously it's really wet in the winter here. Bamboo or reed tubes. Bamboo is extremely hardwood, and so if you don't use a tube in them, you can't really harvest your cocoons out. So it's best to always use the paper liner in the tubes, or if you don't, we encourage you to get rid of your blocks the next year, and we'll talk more about that in a second. You can also drill your own wood blocks, or if you have cut logs from wood that you're saving, you can drill your own. So again, you would need a long 3/8 inch drill bit, and so that's a specialty purchase. But maybe if you have a tool shop and you already have carpentry tools like that, you would drill the hole down 6 inches into a log, and that would replicate what beetles do in nature. So again, our backyard urban forest is trying to mimic what goes on in nature. So if we have some dead wood in our yard, we can attract some beetles, and maybe the beetles will make natural holes, and the mason bees can also use the natural holes. And lastly, we want to talk about the fact that we need some bare soil in our yard, because mason bees are called masons because they harvest clayey mud to plug up their holes. And if I go back, let's see, here, you'll notice that you see the dirt plugging up the holes. So that means that what happens is the female goes in that long tube, and she starts all the way in the back, and she starts putting one cocoon in at a time, and she puts in a little bit of pollen for the larvae to eat when it wakes up. And then she puts a mud wall in, and she will lay 4, 5, 6, or 7 cocoons in that. And then when she gets to the end of the hole, she will put a mud wall over the very end. So that's when you know that your mason bee house has been utilized, when you see it's all full of mud. So then we'll go to this slide where we talk about, so on the left, this is a drilled wood block that is only 4 inches deep. And I've known plenty of people who have these and use them. They do utilize a 4-inch block, but one of the things is that sometimes people don't want to use the liners, and they just put the blocks out without the liners. You can do that, but ideally you need to have several blocks so that you can keep them in rotation. And what I mean by rotation is, if the bees go in here and use it for 1 year, when they come out and hatch, they're going to burst through their mud, and then they're going to feed and immediately look for a new place to put their hole. So if you were going to get into bee, you know, the season where bees are going to come out of the holes, you might want to put a cardboard box over the top of your mudded wood block with a little 6 millimeter hole for an exit, so that they will all exit out the same hole, but they're not going to go in there and try to redo the mud. And then you would put your new block next to it that's not covered with cardboard, so that they'll find the other holes instead of going back in. And the problem with not having liners is that when the mason bees go out to pollinate, they can pick up these mites that are pollen mites that like to eat pollen, and they carry them back into their tube. And those pollen mites end up potentially infesting their tubes, and then they eat all of the pollen that was meant for the baby mason bees when they're coming out of the block for the first time. And so that's going to cause a higher mortality rate for the bees. And so if we use the tubes, we can keep our holes in our blocks clean, and then we can take the tubes out and unroll them and harvest them. And we'll talk more about that in a sec. So this is a picture of what we call emergence boxes. And I have a list of tips that just to readdress here. So when you have a mason bee house, you want to put it where it gets sun. You want to protect the house with a lip by either building a lip of your own over the top of the house, or putting the straws, as you saw in Susan's photo, inside a container that is slightly deeper than the length of the tubes. And you want to keep it out of the wind where the rain's going to blow in. You don't want to use plastic straws. And you want to harvest your liner tubes in the fall. And then you're going to and what that means is you're going to take the tubes out, you're going to make a little cut in the tube, and you're going to unroll it. And then you're going to dump the cocoons out into an emergent box. And the emergent box is going to have a little hole, again, the 6 millimeter, same size hole as the straw that they originally were in. Then you're going to put your emergent box in your refrigerator until spring. Then, let me go back, sorry. Then you're going to place it outside in the spring, somewhere in your yard, near some bare soil and near a little mud pile. And you know, you can just make a small area right near a flowering shrub. Just don't put the bee house or the emergent box right on top of the mud, because you don't want the weak bees to come out and fall in and sort of get stuck in the mud, because they don't have a lot of energy when they first emerge and they need to go out and get food. So they will emerge when it's 54 degrees outside. And so that, like I said, they emerge sooner than honeybees that like it a little bit warmer by several degrees. So we can just put them out and let them come out naturally, and then we want to have new holes for them to find and go back into. You want to keep the mud about 20 to 30 feet away, no more than 20 to 30 feet away from their house, because again, they don't have a lot of energy and they want a source where they can fly back and forth to build their next brood for the next year. Things that we want to avoid: massive bee compounds or insect hotels. They look super cute, and that was a huge trend, and you've seen them, you'll see them all over the internet. They were especially popular in the UK, but bee scientists who started studying the ecology of the bee hotels realized that what it's actually doing is potentially driving up mortality, because if you have multiple size holes, you will attract many predators such as parasitic wasps and spiders and other things that will attack the bees. So if we're really trying to help the mason bees do well, we want to do something more like this corner picture, where you have several mason bee specific houses that are kind of in a collection near each other, or even placed in two different parts of your yard, but you want to just not have everything all together with different size holes. Definitely insects prefer specific niches in nature, and we want to keep those all 6 millimeter holes together. And I'll go back to mason bees, but I'm going to move forward in the presentation in case you have more questions about mason bees, because it's a lot more detailed, but that's what I'm going to talk about right at this moment. So some other things to avoid at your house if you want to help attract and protect wildlife. If you have a lot of large windows, try to use some window clings, and there's all kinds of amazing cute window clings and decorations that you can buy to help keep birds from striking your windows. So bird strikes are thought to be responsible for the death of 1 billion birds in the US alone. And also, if you have super bright lights at nighttime, this is why like downtown Portland or other cities, when they have a lot of lights on at night, birds tend to migrate at night because they have good airflows at nighttime, and they'll cruise through a city because they see the light and it confuses their migration, and then they end up banging into the skyscrapers and having a lot of mortality that way. So it's, you know, residential homes are certainly not responsible for the fact that there's 1 billion birds dying. It's a lot of downtowns and skyscrapers, but there are a lot of bird strikes on windows. And in fact, I just had a friend who was building a new house, and she was had just had a newly installed patio doors, you know, 2 large sliding glass doors, and they had just been put in for 1 day by the builder, and the house is not even finished being sealed or anything. And a tanager flew into her yard and slammed against the French doors and then died. So it was a tragedy, and we were very, very sad. So try to do what you can and use some window clings. So other things to avoid, as you probably know, many cats are super good hunters. And if you have a cat that you know likes to hunt things, try to keep it indoors. And so one of the cool things that Audubon of Portland has been doing is promoting catio tours. There may or may not be one this fall, but we hope that they'll be able to. And what they do is have a registration online, and you go tour people's houses who built some outdoor access for their kitties. And maybe that's an auxiliary to the side of their house or patio. And also a lot of people are training their kitties to go on leashes, which is a good way to go out in your yard, or if your cat is super confident, maybe you can even walk it around your block in your neighborhood, which I have actually seen more people doing, which is kind of fun. Other things to avoid, not surprisingly, chemicals in your yard. So I want to just differentiate between luckily, the data that we have about Oregonians, not as many Oregonians use insecticide as they do herbicides. So specifically, insecticides kill bugs, and herbicides are focused on killing specific types of plants that we consider a weed that we want to get rid of. And that could be a grasses that we don't want. It could be dandelions. It could be, you know, things like holly tree sprouts or something else. And there's all different kinds of herbicide formulas. But one of the most common herbicides that people use is a weed and feed. And weed and feed is the generic term for when an herbicide is mixed with a fertilizer. And a lot of people like to fertilize their lawns in the spring, and so they'll put out a weed and feed to get rid of any lawn weeds. Even more frightening is weed and feed products are now starting to be developed that have not only herbicide, but also insecticides. So it's trying to do a lot of things with one fell swoop. The problem with that is, in particular, weed and feed has a chemical in it called 2,4-D, and there's an herbicide called bifenthrin, which is the most popular, as in it's in the most products on the store shelf. And 2,4-D and bifenthrin are both water hazards. They're polluting our Oregon rivers and streams. And we have been sampling, DEQ has been sampling all over Oregon, and we're finding lots and lots of 2,4-D and lots of bifenthrin in particular. And so this is a problem because insects are a huge part of the ecological food chain. They're also the major food source for returning, and spawning salmon, which I'll talk more about in a few more slides. So the bottom line is, if you're going to use a chemical in your yard, try to use the least toxic chemical you can find, and you can go to Metro's Yard and Garden website for all kinds of information on least toxic chemicals. There's a tool that's called Grow Safe, Grow Smart, and it's great for looking at options on chemicals. And just a word of warning, even if you use a natural chemical, they can still have things in them that can be toxic to bees if the bees come in direct contact with the product. So you always want to use it when bees are not foraging and follow the label. So you either don't spray during the time that it's bee season, or you spray at nighttime when the bees are asleep, and you follow the drying period times so that it doesn't negatively affect the bees. Or just don't spray the flowers, just spray other weeds where the bees are not trying to get food. And then spot spray whenever possible, and hand pull weeds if you can. I like to think of the dandelion tool puller in the bottom left of the slide is actually really fun. It's really easy. It squeezes down onto the flower when you push it down with your foot, and it pulls out the whole root of the dandelion. It's pretty painless, and if you just do it a few minutes every day, it's a little bit of exercise. It's a great chore for a teenager or even a middle schooler. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the river. So I just don't know if you know, but you probably do. Your home is connected to our water. All water is connected to someone else's drinking water, and that might be in glacial time rather than real time, but all water has the potential to become drinking water in the grand scheme of how our world works. And in Oregon, 50% of our drinking water comes from our rivers. As you're probably aware, the Clackamas River is a drinking water source for those people in Clackamas County. The Willamette River is a drinking water source for those down towards Eugene and Salem, Albany. And we also have, surface water in Bull Run in the Gresham, Oregon area. So that's not a river, but it is a source of water up on the mountain that is natural spring-fed water that is harvested to become our drinking water. So this is a good graphic that shows that when the water runs off your driveway into the streets, it goes to the storm drains, and it eventually outfalls to our local rivers and streams. It almost never is treated. There is a portion of the city of Portland, as you probably are aware, that is in the combined sewer area, which means that a portion of Portland's rain goes to the wastewater treatment plant. And it does get treated. However, the important thing to know is that even when water goes through a wastewater treatment plant, pesticides and other harmful chemicals are not typically completely, or if at all, removed from the water before it gets discharged into our rivers again. So wastewater treatment plants are not designed to remove those types of chemicals. They are designed to remove viruses and protozoas and E. coli and other harmful bacteria for human health. And so another fun fact for the Multnomah County, Clackamas County folks that are on the call, this is Johnson Creek. This is a map of Johnson Creek, which runs from Milwaukee all the way up into unincorporated Multnomah County. It runs through Gresham, and it is the largest undammed salmon-bearing stream in our urban area. Super cool. So I put some photos of the salmon and how far they get on Johnson Creek when they return from the ocean to spawn. So in the left of the slide, you'll see the Chinook salmon. They need deeper water, and they don't go up very far, but they get up to about the Lentz neighborhood in Portland. And then you'll see the coho salmon, which has that iconic curved mouth, upper mouth, and they are tend to be the most pink salmon that we see in Johnson Creek. The coho get all the way up to the pretty far east, up towards Badger Creek Watershed, which is also in Clackamas County. And then the steelhead, which are our anadromous trout species that comes back from the ocean. They're in the same family as salmon, but they are actually a trout, not a salmon. They go all the way up past Highway 26 towards Cottrell. So Johnson Creek Watershed Council does resident science and has asked for volunteers to help survey. So we'll talk about that at the fun things to do at the end. So the next thing I want to bring to your attention is if you like to be involved in programs and you want to get certified and get some recognition for what you're doing at your home, you can sign up for the Portland Audubon Columbia Land Trust Certified Backyard Habitat program. And if you live in Gresham and Fairview, we provide a scholarship for anyone where cost is a barrier to participation. It's a $35 registration fee to get a visit at your home and many other benefits. And you can find out more at GreshamOregon.gov and backyardhabitats.org. So here's a list of resources I put together. Won't dwell on it, but there is a New York Times article from 2018 that's super fun, talking about the insect apocalypse and why insects are declining all over the world and how we need to help protect and preserve them. I also highly recommend the OSU Master Gardeners YouTube videos for learning, and there are more in-depth videos on mason bees than I could get into here. As I said before, Metro Yard and Garden pages. East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District has information on their website, and they have now started doing some virtual workshops in addition to the traditional in-person attended workshops. There are also soil and water conservation districts for West Multnomah County and Clackamas County, and also the Tualatin River. So if you're over in Washington County, check out your conservation district. And then I recommend harvesting mason bee tubes. There's a short video by Susan Spencer that maybe we'll show if we have time when I go into questions. And then also want to remind you, a very inexpensive way to get involved in supporting pollinators. Here's some of the great seeds that you can easily order online and add to your yard just by sprinkling them around and making sure they get water. These are some of the best flowers that will support bees, mason bees, and other insects and birds. So some fun stuff I added at the end. Gresham is participating in the Earth Week BioBlitz with the Johnson Creek Watershed Council. It goes all the way through May 1st, and you can take part in it by downloading the app iNaturalist.org. I also encourage you to follow your local watershed council. We have the Columbia Slough Watershed Council, which runs from Kelly Point Park all the way up to almost Troutdale. Columbia Slough Watershed Council hosts paddle events and other things all throughout the watershed throughout the year. And also the Friends of Beaver Creek and the Sandy River Watershed Council, which has an office now in Gresham. And we all love the Sandy River in the summer. It's a great place to escape the heat and go enjoy some of the cool water. Also very, very important to returning and spawning salmon. So another fun thing that we can still do that is 6-foot distance approved. We completed this before the public health crisis started, but February and March, Gresham hosted an amphibian egg mass survey, and I presume we will be doing it again next year. You can find out about natural resource volunteer opportunities by visiting our natural resources webpage at GreshamOregon.gov. And these are pictures of our egg mass survey from this year that I took when we were out. So it's basically a team of 2 to 3 people who go out. You have your assigned ponds and you wade through the ponds together for safety. You use walking sticks to keep yourself upright. and you look for egg masses. And on the left is the red-legged frog egg mass, and they're super gelatinous, and they get really wide, and they're just under the surface of the water, and they can actually be hard to see. They're camouflaged until you get right upon them. But then the northern salamander egg masses are pretty distinctive. They're like a huge golf ball, and they're attached to reeds typically, so those are pretty easy to spot. So really fun way to get out. You just have to stay bundled up because it can be crisp and cold. So I'm going to unmute everyone, and if people want to ask any questions, let's see. Let's see, where's the, make sure that people can talk. Emily?
Yes, so I'm going through now and allowing everyone to talk, but it will start them off muted. So they will have to unmute themselves if they would like to talk. So everyone is allowed to talk now.
So I will see if I can launch this video while
and still feel free to type any questions or anything in the chat.
Okay, record. Okay, this is just a short video to demonstrate what I found to be an easy way to harvest cocoons. The first step is to remove the paper insert from the cardboard guard tube. I found that if I spin it a few times, it makes it a lot easier to come out. The next thing that you want to do is take a look at the little cap of mud and very gently, just very, very gently, squeeze it until it crumbles, until it opens up a little ways in. Then you can use a pair of small fine-tipped scissors, like cuticle scissors, and make a cut into the paper tube. At that point, you'll start peeling the paper tube back, and you'll see the cocoons emerging.
Come here.
And you just keep removing. And if your paper tears, you can repeat that process. And just keep unwinding. Until you run out of tube. In this particular tube, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cocoons. The larger cocoons, like this one, are a female, and smaller cocoons, like this, are the males. From this point forward, this would be where we would wash the cocoons, but if it's too late in the season, like right now, I would suggest not doing that. Okay, there you go.
So those are the cocoons that you would put inside the emergent box that I went through in the presentation. And